Why not try a new camera placement? Hey everyone, Joey here, aka Animus, and welcome to the fourth part of going through every vinyl record I've ever bought up to this point. I'd estimate this is probably the halfway point of the whole series, and we're starting at the letter G today with, coincidentally, 3 jazz albums in a row. First off, Gelato and the Giants, The Big Sound live in London. This isn't normally the kind of music that I would put on, but this is kind of one of those, like, priceless records that has a special connection with a memory of mine, so I'm definitely never gonna give this one away. I went with family to one of his live shows and actually ended up enjoying it quite a fair deal, and came back with this record personally signed to Joey, if you can see the writing there. The name may not mean a whole deal to you, but the guy actually played in front of the Queen once, so it was a pretty big deal to even get a nice little handshake from the guy. It was very sweet. Stan Getz and Dizzy Gillespie, Diz and Getz. This is actually originally from a library, and the idea of a music library is very strange and cool to me in 2022, but just another nice bit of jazz, probably on the lighter and more accessible side. And same goes for Stephane, Grappelli and Barney Kessel. I Remember Django, which is mainly a combination of violin and jazz guitar, which isn't something you hear all the time. There's a track on here called Honeysuckle Rose, which has a very fun violin melody, which I've always thought could go ridiculously hard as a sample, so that's something I've considered doing at some point. And then with an absolutely colossal shift in vibe, Godspeed You Black Emperor, Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven, which is a lot of words. Absolutely seminal post-rock album from the year 2000. This is a very, very heavy double LP, just with 4 tracks, 1 per side. Big monumental soundscapes, enormous emotional crescendos and swells. A very big commitment to sit through in one sitting, but that's the way that I think it's probably best experienced. The first time I heard this album, I felt like I'd sort of reached some higher plane. Really powerful stuff here. This is maybe one of my favourite ever album covers, with just how striking and impactful it can be with so little. On the inside of the gatefold, you've got the tracks kind of split up into more digestible chapters with their own titles, and the inner sleeves forever changed the way I look at the album cover. The pressing itself is kind of okay, and apparently the original pressing sounds a lot better, I'm pretty sure I've heard, so I'll consider maybe trying to find one of those at some point, but I'm pretty happy with this myself. Continuing with the emotionally devastating internet music circle core, Have a Nice Life, Death Consciousness, an album which I only discovered fairly recently, but is perhaps already starting to become one of my absolute favourite albums of all time. Another album which is a lot to take in with its 80-minute runtime, some of the gut-wrenching emotion put into it, and even this really surprisingly deep concept which inspired the whole thing, based around an old, almost forgotten cult, which is detailed in this seriously in-depth book that comes with the vinyl release. It can be very depressing lyrically and musically, with its great sense of space despite its lo-fi quality, and sometimes absolutely crushing heaviness. But also I just find such a human warmth in this music, and sometimes almost a weird kind of coziness to it, which doesn't really make any sense
after
the description I've just given, but you'll probably know what I mean if you've listened to it. It just has such an unmistakable atmosphere to it. I don't listen to it all that often, but when I do, I will set aside a whole hour and 20 minutes to sit through the whole thing front to back, because the final track, Earth Mover, is like probably one of my absolute favourite album endings ever made. There's one point in it when all the tension in the album is just released in the most utterly brilliant, cathartic way, but it only properly hits to its full impact if you have sat through the whole thing in one go, I think. Luckily, the album is being put out in small releases all the time on new colours, and I decided to go for this Galaxy Pink pressing, which is absolutely beautiful to look at. But it was a nice little surprise, actually, because I don't know if they'd had... Go in, you bastard. I don't know if they'd had some kind of problem at the pressing plant or some last-minute decision, but the second disc, called The Future, actually ended up on just straight-up dark, smoky grey marble. Whether this was intentional or not, this is another really beautiful colour, and I think it actually adds a lot to the overall presentation of the thing rather than detracting. Probably one of the best, most elaborate vinyl pressings I've got in my collection, if you include this book with the whole package, to go with some of the best music I've ever heard in my life. And then the most expensive new single LP I've ever bought, Joe Hisaishi's absolutely fantastic Spirited Away soundtrack. This is some of my favourite classical music ever made. It's beautiful, it makes me want to cry, just like the film it comes from. This guy does the music for, I think, pretty much every Hayao Miyazaki film, and they're all put out onto these absolutely gorgeously presented vinyl records. The artwork is bright and vivid and printed onto this really thick, sturdy material. I am such a nerd. This is a double LP with 3 sides of music and then one side with this really sweet little etching. I don't know if I can catch the light just right. But you have Yubaba's Baby and then The Mouse and Bird. Now this is a Japanese import, and what I've heard about Japanese vinyl pressings is that they're done to generally a much higher standard than pretty much the rest of the world. And based on this seems to be absolutely true. This sounds wonderful on my turntable. However, the other thing about Japanese vinyl pressings is that they are very, very pricey, and then you add on the shipping to bring it over to the UK, and you end up with a £65 vinyl record. Yes, I am an absolute madman. That is just how much I wanted to have this in my collection. I considered just buying it to see if it was really that good and then maybe selling it, but I think this is one to keep. But only if you're as enormous a Ghibli and Joe Hisaishi fan as I am. Then got 2 singles from Hybrid, If I Survive and Finished Symphony. At this point in their career, Hybrid were like a fusion of orchestral music and breakbeat music that sounded kind of unlike anything that came before it. The debut album, Wide Angle, is maybe one of my all-time favourites, and I'd love to have that record on vinyl, although it's only been pressed once in the 90s and is fetching some pretty high prices. So for now, I have my 2 favourite tracks from that album. If I Survive features vocals from the late great Julie Cruz, who you may recognise from doing vocals on the Twin Peaks soundtrack. This is an absolute belter of a track and comes with 1 remix from Bieber, not that Bieber, and 1 remix from Hybrid themselves. And then Finished Symphony has to be just one of the greatest pieces of electronic music ever made in history. You can fight me over that. A grand, sweeping, emotional, hard-hitting 9-minute epic which just never fails to amaze me, even like 6 years probably since the first time I listened to it. And then this also on the B-side has their own Echoplex remix, kind of making the 2 go together nicely. Must interject here because this copy of Iglooghost's Neo Wax Bloom that I've just received recently is the absolute coolest thing. My reaction to this album, or the first half of it, unfortunately, because I never found the time to make a part 2, is I think one of the most popular videos on my channel. I loved this thing on first listen. It's like a pure shot of caffeine to the veins. It is hyperactive, it's energetic, it's vibrant. Really, Iglooghost has created a whole world and mythology and aesthetic of his own here, and I was hugely excited that this was getting a repress because original pressings are going for unspeakable money, and I just managed to nab this like the day it went up, before it immediately sold out, so I'm incredibly happy to have this in my collection. Gatefold here with this really weird snake slash worm slash whatever creature, an actual code of this alphabet he's invented so that you can like decipher what's on the cover or write in this scripture or whatever. And most importantly, in terms of visual presentation, one of the absolute coolest variants of any album I've ever bought, and doesn't suffer at all in terms of sound quality for it. It still sounds immense and rich. Definitely one of the things I've been most excited to receive. And then I have Thriller by Michael Jackson, which I basically have nothing to add to the conversation on, so that is a thing. We will move on from there. I have numerous albums from Jean-Michel Jarre, pretty easy to find in second-hand record shops and even charity shops sometimes. Oxygen is naturally my favourite album of his, essential listening for any electronic music fan. Still sounds futuristic and mind-blowing nearly half a century later. I want to display this on a wall. Equinox, his almost as great follow-up, which follows a concept of a whole 24-hour period going from part 1 to part 8. Nearly all of his track titles are just insert album title, part insert number. So they are the kind of thing that you want to put on the turntable and just sit through the whole thing front to back as one experience. Le Champ Magnétique, which has a slightly uncomfortable album cover. I'm generally just not a fan of very big faces on vinyl sleeves. Don't look at me like that. Maybe one of his more inconsistent albums, because there's some really baffling weak spots. Looking at You Part 5. But then there's also sections like the sidelong first part, which are just damn great. Revolutions, featuring the fantastic 4-part Industrial Revolution suite. And Waiting for Cousteau, which is one of his weirdest structured albums, having a 3-part Calypso suite on the A-side, and then slowing the pace right down to the sidelong ambient title track, which might be one of my favourite single ambient tracks ever, or at least one of the ones I listen to the most. On the CD it goes on for an entire 45 minutes and somehow never gets remotely stale, and just has this otherworldly, slightly desolate yet calming atmosphere to it, which I do not mind basking in at all for however long. One of the things I'd kind of test out a new pair of headphones or speakers on. You can't see my other speaker there, but the distance between them makes the stereo image of this track highly immersive. Haven't got around to picking up a full Justice album yet, but I did manage to find a cheap secondhand copy of the DANCE single, which actually has a lot on it. The extended version of the track, the remix BEAT, the radio edit, and Phantom, which I believe is Phantom Parts 1 and 2, another one of my favourite tracks from Cross. Glad to see all the love my Justice videos have still been getting, by the way. And then moving on to a classic in the truest sense of the word, I of course have King Crimson's fantastic 1969 debut in the Court of the Crimson King. This is just straight up like commonly considered one of the greatest albums of all time, and for excellent reason. It still sounds absolutely enormous and surreal and is full of surprises even for listeners in 2022. This is actually the only 200-gram record I have in my collection, which is like super heavyweight. Gorgeous sound quality, and also just like one of the best album covers to have in this great big striking vinyl format. Very glad I've finally got into some King Crimson. And then going from one fantastic psych rock band with King in its name to another, we have the Australian titans themselves, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Do not forget the poor Lizard Wizard, always left out. I definitely love to have an album like Nonagon Infinity or Flying Microtonal Banana on vinyl, but interestingly, the only album of theirs I currently own is their Live in Brussels 2019 album, which I found enormously reduced in a sale. This is on double purple translucent vinyl, which is glowing in my lighting right now, and is a really damn solid set of performances. Side 4 of this album in particular goes ridiculously hard with the trilogy of Robot Stop, Big Fig Wasp, and Gamma Knife, before Float Along Fill Your Lungs, which finishes off the whole thing. So yeah, definitely looking to expand my King Gizzard collection in the future, but this is currently the one album I own of theirs. And then an ambient classic, KLF, Chill Out. This is interesting as this album is actually not on any streaming services. The only way to own it is in physical format at the moment, which kind of makes this vinyl album here a little bit more special. An incredibly rare original pressing, but this that I have here is a clear repress of the album. It's essentially structured like a road trip through America. It's full of lots of interesting field recordings. Just a really breezy listen, and one with a production that holds up incredibly well 30 years later. Coming from an era where a lot of stuff can sound very dated, this is a very refreshing listen. You can see my face through it. Very excited to share this one with you. This is Kraftwerk The Man Machine, and an original pressing from the 70s. But not just any old copy of the album, because recently I was lucky enough to go to a signing of Karl Bartos's new book at Sister Ray in Soho, and I also brought along this copy of the album and got it signed. He was an absolutely lovely guy, really surreal to meet him, and this must be an incredibly rare item to have, so it's one that I'm going to cherish forever. Definitely not thinking of giving this away to anyone anytime soon. This may still be my favourite Kraftwerk album, zips in, zips out, with 6 tracks, all of which are absolute bangers front to back. Really an essential album in the history of electronic music and music in general. And again, I'd love to get some more Kraftwerk albums, but at the moment the only other record I have from them is this nice single of Tour de France, which is cool. And then I have what is, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is just straight up my favourite rap album of all time, which is actually a very cold take these days. Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly. Honestly, there's probably absolutely nothing I can say about this album that hasn't already been said and is interesting. But despite the kind of weirdly low-res cover image here, it's a very elaborate bit of packaging when you open up the gatefold, because there's these like secret little hidden messages. I don't know if I can... There's one. Thank you for family part 2, whatever that means. And even some braille writing on the inside. Just an absolutely unbelievable musical achievement here. I honestly think this is one of the best written, best produced, and best performed albums of all time, and an absolute masterwork that just single-handedly proves the power that rap music can have. Honestly, if you've ever doubted the possibilities of the genre, I think this is an excellent album to prove you wrong. And then another special one, I have a copy of Mdou Moctar's 2021 album, A Freak Fig Team, which is signed by all 4 members of the band. I literally just picked this up in rough trade like this. I was incredibly happy to find one of these. This was an unexpected favourite of mine from last year, with its titanic riffs and great sprawling psychedelic freakouts. This is just on black vinyl, but there does exist a pressing of this album which is on a 3-way split to turn the record into the flag of Niger, which is such a cool idea. And then a very, very big one in many different ways to close out this part of the series. I have Michal Menert's Even If It Isn't Right. The name Michal Menert may not mean much to you, but the first time I heard this gargantuan, expansive electro hip-hop mega album front to back at like 6 in the morning on the way to a school residential trip, it's just like shot up to become one of my favourite albums of all time. I will admit that this album doesn't always entirely hold my attention front to back like it used to, probably just because of the number of times I've listened to this damn thing, but this still holds a very special place in my life. This thing came out in 2012, but never had a physical release until just last year, when the pre-order was announced for this triple splatter vinyl release, and my jaw just dropped to the floor. This was one of like the albums I most wanted to come out on vinyl, and I was just overjoyed when this came in the post. Got this great big triple panel gatefold image, which is insanely cool. I believe Michal Menert himself came up with this. So you got one disc on this like translucent crystally blue with a darker blue marble. Another disc that's kind of like yellowish / forest green depending on where you hold it in the light, and also has some subtle colorations inside it. And then the final disc is just the most delicious looking blue color. It's like the sea on a beautiful day. God, I love nerding out about records. So if you're into electronic music and or hip-hop music, I would definitely recommend checking this out as soon as possible. It is a masterwork which still has a very strong emotional impact on me. Which concludes part 4 of my vinyl series. I really hope you have enjoyed this video. Sorry I've been drip feeding content recently. I really wish school wasn't so all-consuming. Do stay tuned for the continuation of this long-ass series and other projects I'm working on at the moment. But for now, thank you for watching. See you next time.